Well, we know that Jesus is God, right? We as Christians believe that, so we as Christians pay attention when Jesus says words. He speaks words, and we pay attention when people ask him questions, and he gives answers. And today, someone asks him a question, and we're paying attention to how he answered the question. And the question was, what's the greatest commandment? And he says, what? He says, you shall love the Lord your God with your whole heart, soul, mind, and strength. And you shall love your neighbor, as yourself. The second commandment. And before I dwell on that a little bit, I'd like to say a few comments about politics. We're in a political season. And I think politics is, if you think about it, it's mostly related to that second commandment, right? It's mostly how to love our neighbors as ourselves. And so our best politicians ask themselves the question, how can I serve? How can I help society so that we love one another and we're treating one another as we would like to be treated, right? And if you take a couple, for example, hot-button issues like abortion, one side might say, how can we help the mother? How can we help her to make choices so that she's served? But the other side says, yes, let's help the mother, but let's not forget the baby. What if you were a baby? What are the baby's rights? So you have this tension between people trying to help, right? Or another hot-button issue like, you hear this these days, gender dysphoria. Kind of a scary word, but it's a word people who aren't sure of their gender and would like to choose another gender. One side of the issue might say, with empathy, these people are hurting. They're confused. How can we help them? Let them make choices to relieve their suffering, right? But then the other side will say, well, yes, we need to help them, but these choices, these options that they have might bring them suffering and might make society and them even worse off. So that's the first thing I'd like to say, is that politics is mostly about the second commandment of Jesus. And loving neighbor as oneself involves acknowledging and affirming any noble motives in our political opponents, right? It involves not labeling too quickly. It involves avoiding creating a caricature of our opponents in our own minds. Some can say so-and-so politician is hopelessly narcissistic. They're only interested in themselves and in using other people for political gain. He or she is 100% corrupted. Or someone on the other side might say, well, the other side just wants to control every aspect of our lives. That's what this whole mask thing is all about, right? It's about control. And we don't like those people who try to control us. But we as Christians, in heeding this second part of the commandment, should have an impulse within us to view others as God views us. And he knows that we are a mixed bag of motives and actions, right? He knows that we are not 100% angel, nor are we 100% devil. So God affirms the good that is within us, and then he draws that good out. He draws us to become something better. The third thing I'd like to say about politics is, although loving our neighbor involves making choices, even political choices, right, to how can we best take care of our neighbor, and it involves working cooperatively with other people, even those we disagree with, to find the best ways to do that. We need to remember that Jesus says that this is the second greatest commandment, that the commandment to love our neighbors as ourselves is the second commandment, and that the first commandment is even more important. And one could say that the second commandment is like the first commandment, as Jesus says, but it's ordered secondarily to the first. The two sync or jive. They work together. And this order has implications for us in the political realm. The last thing I'll say is the way Jesus orders the commandments today kind of reminds me of a recent homily by a priest who reminded us that those of us who are Americans are really Christians first. We are Christians first, Catholic Christians first. And second, we are Americans. And that's really third, speaking politically, that we are Democrats and Republicans. So we are Christians first, Americans second, and Democrats and Republicans third, in that order. And this order should inform our political decision-making. And this order should inform our voting. And we should vote, for example, preeminently as Christians, and then as Americans, and then as Democrats and Republicans. And voting is not something that is only connected to the second commandment of today, to love our neighbor. It's also something that is very connected to the first commandment, to love God, to put God first above everything. But I'd like to shift gears from politics and perhaps now say a few brief words about that first commandment of loving God above all things. And I'd like to discuss some practical ways that we can love God with our whole heart, soul, mind, especially our strength. And the way we do that is really similar to the same way that we love other people in our lives, whether it be a spouse, our children, our extended family, or our friends. We love them by paying attention to them. We love them by paying attention to them. And notice this phrase. This phrase has always just struck me. Paying attention to someone. To pay is to sacrifice, to give something to someone that you have. And to pay involves effort and involves cost. And this is probably a good definition of prayer itself, right? Prayer is simply paying attention to God. And the simple thing is not easy, just like loving those in our lives is not easy. And the Catechism reminds us of this difficulty. And in fact, there's a whole section of the Catechism. One of the 4 sections of the Catechism is on prayer and assists us how we should pray. And the Catechism speaks of distractions, that all of us will encounter obstacles as we try to pay attention to God. And one of the main obstacles that's mentioned are distractions, right? So a husband, for example, may not pay proper attention to his wife because of too many distractions, perhaps, whether it's work, whether it's sports, hobbies, the news, his phone, things that are competing for his attention. And so it is also in prayer. And with distractions in prayer, they might be voluntary or involuntary. And though distractions might be helpful when we discover them, they might be helpful in identifying what we are attached to or what we are concerned about. And we should pay a little bit of attention to this. It is important in our prayer to stay focused, to keep focused, to love God. And it's important to pay the price of attention to God. And God will gently assist us in this as our mind wanders. He will assist us, perhaps like parent of an ADD child. We're all ADD when it comes to prayer. So we might practically decide to perhaps keep the phone away during prayer and those incessant dings, those dings that we hear constantly coming from our phones, trying to distract us. And even if during a particular prayer time we don't feel anything, the very fact that we tried, that we struggled, is an indication that we are attempting to love God with our whole mind and strength, right? The Catechism also speaks of the obstacle of dryness in prayer. And we know that every marriage or relationship that we have contains dry times, right? We know that the honeymoon doesn't last forever. We know we learn how to love in good times and in bad, in exciting times, and we learn how to love in the humdrum, boring times where we're really not getting a lot out of this. And it's part of the package of loving. It's part of the package of marriage. And don't let anyone tell you that your marriage is bad because you have that aspect. In fact, it's in the dry times where we best prove our love for someone. But if we experience dryness in prayer, it's not always related to learning how to love God, perhaps in the dry times, outside of the honeymoon times. Sometimes it can be related to forces operating in our lives that can stifle the life of God in us, stifle our prayer. And I thought perhaps maybe it's a little bit like autoimmune diseases that we hear a lot about these days. An autoimmune disease, or the definition of one, is a disease in which our own immune system, right, attacks our body, attacks our organs or other parts of our body. So something within us is fighting against us. We're not fighting something outside of us. Our own body is fighting our own body. So in fact, our dryness in our prayer may be related to our own bodies, what's happening inside, our tired bodies perhaps, our overworked bodies, our sick bodies. And our attempt to love God with our whole strength in prayer might mean simply just getting proper rest or making effort to get healthy, if possible. Now, another thing perhaps inside of us that might lead to dryness in our prayer is habitual sin or prolonged temptation. That also can try to stifle the prayer within us, preventing us from paying attention to God, preventing us from loving God. And we all know the doctor's prescription for that, right? The doctor's prescription for habitual sin or prolonged temptation is to go to confession. And it's good to remember, and the Catechism reminds us that dryness and obstacles in prayer are normal. Everyone experiences them. And it's important for us not to get discouraged when we encounter these obstacles in our attempt to love God with our whole strength. And the Lord leaves us strength also through this Eucharist, that He really intends the Eucharist that we celebrate today, the sacraments in particular, but this particular sacrament, to give us the strength that we need to obey the difficult commandments of loving God with our whole heart, our whole mind, our whole strength, and loving our neighbors as ourselves, the commandments that He spoke today. But He doesn't leave us orphan. He gives us what we need on our journey to do this. So may you draw strength from the sacraments, from the Eucharist especially, and believe that when you receive, and if your heart is right, and you want to love God with more of your strength and with more of your heart and with more of your mind, that He will assist you in that. It's not just up to us. He gives us the strength that we need.